When talking about honorariums, I think it's important that the church sets a policy of what the honorarium is for someone coming in to speak or workshop or do something in the church. Mind you, there's a certain standard that we ought to be. Some ministries want to be cheap. Other ministries want to give a store away. What you give to someone coming in for speaking speaks volumes about who you are and the integrity and your value, and you represent the church. And each ministry must get in line with doing that. So that means they want to invite a so-and-so to come in and speak, then they need to check with our finance team or myself to say, hey, this is what the honorarium needs to be for this individual. A person coming to preach and do a workshop and they come on Women's Day and you give them a certain amount of money and then later on they come because the youth want them to come back and they come back and do something for the youth, and there shouldn't be a discrepancy of how much money they got from you as a church. Integrity in what you do. Ministry lines, they should get a statement that says what the income for their particular, what we call in finance, line items. So each ministry has a line item. Men's ministry, mission and outreach, women's ministry, youth ministry. That's a line item. Even though, and that's separate, that's internally how you keep track of budgets and money in the house. I'm not even talking about when it comes to the bank account. The bank account is a whole separate matter. It really is. So you've got to decide how many accounts you may have in a bank with the money that comes in. Now, on the bank's part, all they know is you've got X number of thousands of dollars in your bank account. It's you internally decide that 20,000 of that 100,000 is in this line, 5,000 is in this line. That's the work of your treasurer, that's the work of your finance team to work out what those line items are and what you do in that. We normally practice, and I hope you do, that we do yearly give people a giving statement, how much they have given to the church in that particular year. A giving statement. I encourage you, if you have a staff and you can do it and put the volunteers in place, give them a giving statement 6 months and at 12 months. I believe when it comes to finance, it's about information. If I give them correct, accurate, timely information, people will do right about the information. So therefore, give them a 6-month giving statement. And when I say giving statement, it ought to outline literally on what week they gave and how much they gave. A typical would be, for 6 months, I have 5 Sundays in the month of January. What money came in from that individual for each one of those Sundays? They ought to know what that figure is, what have you. And whether it was given to, in my case, general fund or a dedicated particular ministry. And that's printed out on the sheet. So they get it and they can clearly see, oh yes, I have given this money and where it went. Financial integrity and communication with folk. I think it's important. So do that for folk. Certainly, we have folk who give money and they want to claim that money that they give to us as a charitable nonprofit institution on their taxes. Not everybody does that. Did you hear me? Not everybody does that. And those that do is not a sign that somehow they are spiritually weak or inconsistent or their heart is not in the ministry. Don't even go there. You ought to stay out of those judgmental assessments of people. But people do that. We ought to be careful making sure that those are given out on a timely basis. Used to be that idea of unspoken rule was that by January 31st, any kind of giving statements by any organizations, institutions, including the church, that people should have that in order for them to file their taxes. That's not a hard and fast rule, but that's something that we ought to shoot for. So people shouldn't be asking for what's going on and where the statements, how much did I give? One of the areas of church ministry we get into trouble is the issue of petty cash. Institutions in the community, I've seen the downfall. this issue of petty cash. And quite frankly, I would encourage you that you limit the petty cash and that it is an ongoing basis of monitoring that and getting receipts and then replenishing it. I think in my particular ministry, I have to decide what would I have a need for petty cash for. So right now, no more than $100. That's what I have, and it is monitored by the administrator, and any penny that's spent out of it, the receipts are turned in. Once the receipts equal that $100, then we will replenish it, put that $100 back in there, take those receipts. Receipts, there's that magic thing. Sometimes ministries, and this day and age we still do receipts, even though so much is done in terms of electronics and credit cards and that, what have you. But receipts are crucial. And we should not be at the end of the year when we have institutions asking us to give an account for how we spent money, hunting for receipts. So that is a challenge when you have a multiplicity of ministries seeking to use money. So what I say to folk, and what we say as a policy is, if you want and need to spend money for ministry, you need to come to the finance ministry, make your proposal, and they will sign off on it saying, yes, you can spend that money for what your purpose is, and then they will articulate how it is to be acquired. Whether we write a check, whether we use a credit card, whether someone goes and pays it, but they will determine that so that we keep, when you have a whole lot of people dealing with money, everybody on the same page. One of the early policies put in place was that you do not get a chance to spend church money without first getting approval to spend it. Do you recognize if you have a multiplicity of people and everybody wants to do something and they're spending money and then they turn in a receipt, you can be out of balance every month that way. They don't understand cash flow. They don't understand credit balances. So, no. Ahead of time, it forces people to be creative, to think through how they want to spend the money. It forces people to get approval, and it forces people to stay within it. A ministry is doing a ministry, you need to do a budget for that particular event that you're doing. What do you plan to spend the money on? How much does it cost? What research have you done so that you stay within your budget or come in under the budget? Nothing wrong with that. That is a part of financial integrity that we start with the finance ministry of the church and all the ministries of the church. One of the things, we have change in leadership in ministry, all the ministry, including finances. There's a requirement is that, if we grow as a church and more people involved, we have a sign-off release that says, this is the chairperson of this ministry, this is the the treasurer of this particular ministry, so that when that request comes in for something to be paid, it is signed off by both the chair of the ministry and also the treasurer of the ministry. It's checks and balances to ensure that my volunteer finance ministry team is not sitting up there trying to guess, do I pay this or do I not pay this? One of the things that auditors say is that in paying bills, you must put into structure a place where people sign off on bills. I should never, ever have in a church where we pay a bill we should not have paid. That should just not be. We're not giving money out to people and they hold it on to our money. So therefore, that means you fill out a request form. This is the money, this is the account, signed off by the ministry leaders. This is how much we propose to spend. This is the purpose for it. It's signed off. And it says also is that if it's coming from a vendor, someone outside you're doing business with, they need to give you an invoice. I'm going to tell you right now, an invoice. I don't write blank checks to folk. Not at all. Invoice. And be very clear, I am a non-profit. I do not pay tax. I'm tax exempt. So therefore it says to vendors, contractors, subcontractors, Here is my copy of my tax exempt status, and I do not pay taxes. If someone sends me an invoice and taxes off, I send it back to them, take the taxes off. We don't pay taxes. So let's be clear about that, because I need to be accountable for every penny that comes in this house that people give, and they want to know there's an integrity with it. So be careful about how you do that. Make sure that when people are doing proposals to do something, we usually require them to come up with 2 or 3 proposals that the finance team can look at and say, for this job to be done, this one is proposing this is proposing this is what they propose to get the job done. That's when it pushes us to do an RFP, which is basically to say, you describe the work you want to be done and how you want it to be done. You give that to a vendor, and the vendor responds by telling you how much it will cost you to deliver what you requested them to deliver. That allows apples to be measured by apples, oranges by oranges, and etc. That you need to come to the finance team so they can make a judgment to say, this person is charging us 10 times or 2 times more than the other person. Sometimes we don't go with the person who's the cheapest. Sometimes we're like, okay, we really want the person who will get the job done and get it done the way we want it done, with the quality that we want, in the time frame that we want it. But it's important that we spend the time, have some measurements, because most cases we're dealing with stuff, I don't keep the track of what it means to repair the roof. I want 2 or 3 proposals. You like to think, and the day was that nobody would cheat the church. But folk out there would cheat the church just as fast as they would cheat anybody else, with no, as we say, with no fear of God in their life. The other part about people in giving and financing is, don't shy away from saying thank you. Thank you. That means saying thank you to people for their giving. Churches are a volunteer association. People give gifts. Take time to write a thank you. You have cost centers and people are renting your place, whatever. Give them a receipt. But take the time to say thank you to folk. In my case, it's usually a written form. I don't even use emails. I may thank them over the email, what have you, but they're getting a written letter. They're getting a written correspondence from me, or from my finance secretary, or my treasurer, or somebody saying, we want to thank you for your giving. Some people like to give in-kind services. And, that may be how you decide to choose. What I mean by that is, they may say, you know what, I want to donate this to the church, this time, and therefore give me a receipt of what the calculated income of what it would cost for doing that, and I can use that for my tax purposes. Quite frankly, I practice a ministry. I don't do any of that, because that puts me in a place that I've got to calculate the value of what you want to give. And I really don't want to do that. That's not my expertise. That's not the expertise of my volunteer financial people. So no, I don't do that. And quite frankly, I get folk who want to give me junk. Oh, Reverend Lloyd, we're moving and I got a piano. Can't the church use a piano? No, thank you very much. That's not me. There are other agencies that will take that. They'll give you a receipt for what you gave and you got a dollar value to it and do it. Not at all. I don't do that, and that's not what we do. So therefore, I just practice, keep those kinds of contributions to yourself, what have you. I try to practice a ministry where we pay for what we want. Hear me now? Pay for what we want. So in my particular ministry, the church, the only loan I have is my mortgage. Everything else we pay for as we go. We pay for as we go. That's in financial integrity. Can all ministries get there? Well, it's a struggle, but I think that's a very aspirational part of you in doing that, to go for it and do it and get it. This day and age, as I've mentioned, So much is done with technology. Banks will give you credit card, a printout of every charge that's done there. And that's what that is. That needs to be reconciled. Making sure they're not making mistakes. Even banks make mistakes. I can remember one of the times when I went out of the country, I'm out of the country, I come back into the country, and the next thing I know, I have a vendor out of Colorado that says to me, calls me up on the phone and says to me, well, hello, Greater Framingham, this is so-and-so, and we have here a purchase here from some church or in this case, I think it was a church in some country, and we recognize that we don't do business with you. So we're calling to make sure that this request for 5 Havoc units that at that time were worth $45,000, that this is your request. Well, I'm gonna tell you right now, I wasn't buying 5 Havoc units for $45,000. In this day and age, 1 Havoc unit will cost you $45,000, just so you know. Times have changed. But I was appreciative they called that. Now, let me share with you. In that scenario, certainly the communication was no. That meant that somebody in some banking institution got the information of the church and they tried to make a purchase for Havoc units to be sent to their entity, which was even out of the country, and be charged to our account. Now, in that irregularity, I'm going to tell you right now, I had to have a conversation with my bank because I needed to say to my bank, how come y'all did not catch this? Now catch this. At the end of the day, we did not make that purchase and the bank would have ate it. But I don't want that stain on the reputation of the church that somehow they didn't catch what they needed to do. See, so banks make a mistake, but you've got to have that relationship with them. And by the way, the bank really ought to get a copy of your financial statements because they have to give an accounting to someone else about the money that's coming in and the money going out. So yes, do that, and that's a part of it. But those kinds of things happen. You need to be upfront. You need to be honest with folk. You need to say what it is. Which brings a question about, when it comes to finance, insurance. Does your church have insurance? This day we live in a day of litigation. You really ought to have insurance. An umbrella policy, and then underneath the umbrella policy are other types of insurance. Insurance for malfeasance. Insurance this day and age for accusations of abuse. Insurance in terms of on the building, whether it's fire, whether it's flood, whether whatever, all kinds of different kinds of insurances. There are different categories. They come under the umbrella. You can pay that insurance one lump sum, or you pay it over the course of 3 or 4 times, whatever way you set up throughout the year. There's payroll insurance. Whether or not you pay, in my particular case, all my personnel are part-time people, so I don't pay into unemployment insurance. All right? Some churches, they have bigger operation, they have full-time people, they're paying unemployment insurance. So the person gets laid off. Insurance that handles accidents. You've got a vehicle, insurance on that vehicle. Responsibility of keeping that up to date, intact. We do not want your church to come into a financial situation because of the failure to keep those policies in place. Litigations, I'll tell you right now, every time I turn around, I got somebody going to tell me that they fell on our property, or snow, and they fell on the ice. Well, I'm in an urban setting. That means I got neighbors all around me. And you know what? My attitude is, oh, wait a minute, that's why I have an insurance company. You think you fell on our property? Make a claim. That claim goes to the insurance company. That is not something I spend my time with in dealing with and what have you. Not at all. That's why I have an insurance company. That's where they deal with those claims. And 9 out of 10, you know what have I found? They weren't on my property. They're on somebody else's property. But they would think this is a church, therefore this is easy money and you will pay out. That ain't happening. That ain't happening. And so that's the responsibility of the insurance company, their lawyer, investigate it, keep me abreast, and their communication with me to say, okay, this person wants to settle the claim, or are you willing to settle it? What does that mean? And quite now, recently, I just said to my one attorney, I said, well, you know what? The evidence shows it's not there, but if they, they're trying to get money out of me and use $100,000 for medical bills, I'm like, no, not at all. If your insurance pays out of claim, my premiums go up. Not interested. Because at the end of the day, that means you're hurting the ministry of the church. I have to put more money in there than I want to do for something else in ministry. So therefore, I said, well, if they want to go that far, that's what your job is, what have you. Sometimes they'll recommend, say, oh, Reverend Lloyd, I think you ought to settle, what have you. And even under that recommendation, it may be settlement. If it's a settlement without cause. I am not accepting fault or blame because you really can't prove that. Now, if you can prove it, and I failed to do something, my snowplow company did not take it and pay, do a right job, then yes, we're going to pay. I want integrity in what I do. That means subcontractors coming in to do work. People that rent in your building. People who provide services. They should be doing riders on their insurance. And what a rider says is that while they're in your building, they have insurance to cover what takes place. That's a rider. When I do events off-site from the church in another place, I rent a facility, what have you, I call my insurance company. I get a rider for that event. That means what I do in that location, my insurance covers that event. Take the time, and that's only a 2-minute thing. They can do it verbally over the phone. You telling them the date, time, location, how many people, and what you're doing, and they will put a rider there that says, we cover this event for that with your insurance. And they will send you a notice saying you have a rider. Subcontractors need to submit to me a rider saying they are covered as they come into my building for whatever they're doing. That insurance is there for it. So nuggets in this area of financial management, how we do things. Online giving is a big deal. I'm sure out of COVID, everybody jumped in to these here online giving, and we need to be flexible in giving people ways in which they give. But let me also remind you, there are penalties involved. What is the percentage that these institutions, these companies are taking off the top? So if someone gives $1, how much of that money are you really getting? Some places I'm only getting 65%, 65 cents of every dollar, or 80 or 90. You need to do your homework and figure which ones out are best advantages for you as a ministry. You don't want to give all your money away to all these kinds of situations, none of that. Sometimes folk want to come to the church and say, can I borrow money from the church? I'm going to tell you, I have a policy. We don't lend money to anyone. We are not a lending institution. You're in crisis. I have a ministry where we support people in giving money, helping people put roof and clothes and food at the table and whatever, utilities and those kinds of things. And that is our outreach in giving and supporting people, both in the church and out of the church. I am not a lending institution. So therefore, I am not in the business of you paying me back for this. Not at all. Someone extremely insists, well, I must give, then guess what? Put something in the plate. But I don't want to know about it. It is not a tit for tat in what you do. We are a church. I don't want to be a bank. That's not what we are about. Certainly, investment portfolios we've talked about. Transfer of stocks. Have you given any thought about that? Boy, some folk don't have no cash, but they got stocks, and they will transfer money. I have to say to you that, you know what? They usually have someone who's handling that transaction, and they do that transfer of stock. I have an example right now. I have a person who wants to transfer stock, and they want to give money to help in terms of the crises going into Ukraine right now. They noticed that we as a church did a campaign and asked people to give special money specifically for the crisis in Ukraine. My mission and outreach ministry decided we will match every dollar that the congregation gives, and we're going to give that. And we do research and make sure that we have given the money to a reputable institution that is really giving and making sure that money gets on the ground to the people who are in need. That means you've got to do a little homework to decide which one is reputable. There are institutions out there that advertise they're doing great work, and their percentage on the top taken off is unbelievable. And people will give money so I can take it and make for a lifestyle for the CEO. I can remember when Hurricane Katrina hit, what I had to do was, in order to get money on the ground, I decided I need to check out and find out a church that was there on the ground doing ministry and gave ministry to that particular church, knowing that they gave me a report back saying this is what they did with the money. So I encourage you to do that. This particular case, I have a person that says, Reverend Lloyd, I want to give some stock to this to help in the Ukraine. And the church, they relied on us, the integrity, that we have done a research, and the organization that we gave the money to, they wanted to give money to that. Because individually, they don't have time to figure out who's a reputable institution or not. In this case, their lawyer transferred X number of dollars of transfer stock to us, and we in turn turned around and wrote a check for that amount and sent it to the organization. They relied on the church for the integrity of where they were giving the money to. Takes a little extra work to do it, but I think it's well worth it, and people are expecting that out of us. And people will transfer stock. Sometimes stock, you will do it, and you want to keep it in your portfolio. Sometimes you transfer stock, and you say, you know what, we want to cash this out, all right, and want the cash to go into the line item for the church. That's a decision the finance team must decide on based on the income coming in. But notice that people will want to do that as well. One-time giving, consistent giving, but finances in giving money. Nuggets on finances. It's a challenge. Folk want integrity. It takes some time. It takes the right people with the right heart and them coming alongside you in this ministry. What you don't know in finances, do some homework to learn about it. Not that you have to cross, you individually, in your leadership position, have to dot every I or cross every T. But you should have an understanding and expectation for integrity in the giving. Some possible resources when I think about this idea of finances and ministry. One book is Inside the Nonprofit Boardroom by Charles Golding. Great little book. I encourage you. That's a great one. It allows you to get in and see how it works. Another one, The C Factor. That's really tailored to capital campaigns. And I didn't even talk this time even about a capital campaign. That's a whole nother subject matter. And maybe at another session, we'll talk about what it means to do a capital campaign. Whether you raised all the money, whether a banking institution looks at you and says, you're a viable institution that we can lend the money to. What are they looking for? What is involved in it? Yes? Can you hear me now? I trust you can. Thanks for spending time with us.